Son, and give him the glory, great things he hath done.
Well, good morning. I'm glad you tuned in to Inspiration for Today. It's always appreciated by me that you watch, and I appreciate your comments so very, very much. This week, we're looking at Mark chapter 8, just because God put it in my reading plan really a couple weeks ago. And I was so impressed by all the good insight into what God would have for us that I was reading. And I just wanted to share it with you. And it's not that well known of a chapter, but boy, the incidences are, each one of them is pretty well known. And that's true of the one that we come to today. Now, if you remember yesterday, we talked about the most important question that will ever be asked. And he asked that question of his disciples, Jesus did. Remember what it was? It was, who do you say I am? He had asked, who do people say I am? And they gave an answer. And then he said, but much more importantly, who do you say I am? And that's a question that all of us need to be ready to answer. So it's in that context then that Peter had given really the correct answer. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. You know, some prophecies are way in the future, and you can find evidence of this prophecy in the Old Testament. But he's making a prophecy that's going to be fulfilled in a very short period of time. And it's a very serious one, isn't it? They had been traveling with Jesus and ministering with him, seeing major miracles and crowds come for his teaching. And now he's saying very explicitly, I must die. And I will rise again after 3 days. That is heavy duty. You would feel, if you knew that your good friend was going to die very soon, and he's predicting, though, that he's going to rise again. That takes a lot of faith to believe it. He spoke plainly about this, verse 32. And Peter then took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus. Can you imagine? But Peter did it. But then Jesus turned and he looked at his disciples and he rebuked Peter. And he says, get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. You see, he was reacting like a human, like a man would likely do. No, Jesus, you can't do that. You must not. You must not die. Yeah, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. He did it because he just didn't want that for his beloved Jesus. But then Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Now, was Peter Satan, actually? No, he wasn't. Peter was one of the disciples of Jesus. But was what he said what Satan would say? Of course Satan would say that. Why would Satan say that? Because he knew that when Jesus conquered death, he was finished. That then the people who followed Jesus and put him in their heart would also live forever. So it would have been Satan's plan that Peter was repeating. Because Satan would have loved, he tried to stop Jesus from going to the cross, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. And I find so interesting that last sentence. Did you catch it? It says, you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. You know, a lot of times we pray for something and we pray for it for years. And we're seeing it, of course, from our perspective. We're not seeing it the way that God sees the big picture. He sees everything that has to do with a certain situation. What if he needed you to move to a different state, let's say, so that in that state, you might have strong kingdom impact that he sees it? How would he get you to move? He'd probably cause you hard times in your present situation, where you live or your work or with a child or whatever it might be. And that difficulty you would start praying for immediately. Lord, please, I don't understand this. Please take care of my job, let's say. They want me to move to a certain state, and I don't want to move. Lord, can you please answer this prayer? But we only see it from the human perspective. God sees everything. And that was so true on that day. Peter didn't want Jesus to have to suffer and die. But God knew he must do it for the salvation of mankind. And so God would not have answered that prayer for Peter. And in fact, in the harshest words, Jesus says that basically that viewpoint is of Satan. And Peter, of course, would not want to represent Satan either, but he didn't see it. He didn't see it. He didn't see the whole kingdom picture. And for me, this is a huge lesson. I know I remember praying, I prayed, and Diane prayed for my mom's salvation for over 30 years. And God just never seemed to answer. But in her final 6 months or so, he did answer and drew her to himself. I don't know to this day why it took so long. But you know what? I don't need to know. My faith is in a God who does know, who has perfect timing in everything. And I really believe that when we pray, we should pray, Lord, if it's your will, please do such and such. Because you see, that's what we really want. If we've been a believer for very long and we understand how he works. Sometimes the way he works is just not the way we see it. I think we're supposed to still pray, but we're also to accept how God answers that prayer. And sometimes that answer is no, or wait. And if it's his will, then that's the perfect answer to our prayer. So for me, this short couple of verses right here in Mark 8 says so much. Peter couldn't understand what God was doing, but he did later and gave his whole life for it once he saw that Jesus rose from the dead and conquered death. Peter gave his whole life and died for that cause. He was killed. He was martyred himself. Well, we're going to learn a little bit more tomorrow. I sure hope you're here to enjoy it with me. See you then.
Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give him